She took two things from me in one night: my marriage and the money we'd spent years building together. The call came from Miami. My wife told me she was leaving me for her boss. She thought she'd walked away with everything, but she had no idea I'd been expecting this moment for months. By the time she realized what was really going on, it was already too late. The trap had closed. Ever been underestimated by someone who believed they held all the cards? I have. And I can tell you, sometimes the quietest revenge comes wrapped in patience and precision. My name's Ethan Ward. I'm 45 years old, and this is the story of how betrayal tried to destroy me. But instead, it taught me how to stay calm, think ahead, and strike when it truly counts. That night, I sat at the kitchen table in my Denver home. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator as I reviewed a spread of client portfolios. Numbers always gave me peace. They made sense. They were predictable, unlike most things in life. Then my phone lit up. Brooke Carter. Just seeing her name pulled a knot tight in my stomach. She was supposed to be at a pharmaceutical sales conference in Miami, but something about that glowing screen felt off. I answered, keeping my tone steady. Brooke Carter. There was a short pause before she spoke, her voice clipped and professional, like she was delivering a report instead of ending a marriage. Ethan, I need to tell you something, she said. I'm not coming home. I set my pen down and clenched my jaw, though I forced my voice to stay calm. What's going on? She let out a slow, rehearsed sigh. I've met someone. It's been happening for a while. His name's Daniel Mercer, my boss. He understands me. He sees my potential. Her words were sharp, calculated to sting. Then, with a kind of cold satisfaction, she delivered the finishing blow. I've already emptied our joint investment account. My lawyer said it was the smart thing to do. I stared at the spreadsheets in front of me, the numbers blurring until they didn't matter anymore. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, almost detached. I understand, I said. For the first time, her composure cracked. That's it. You understand? But I didn't respond. Take care, Brooke Carter, I said simply, and hung up. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat there in silence, my hands resting on the cool edge of the wood. After a moment, I opened my laptop and logged into our financial portal. The numbers confirmed what I already suspected. She tried to transfer $212,000, 00 from what she believed was our main investment account. The screen flashed a yellow notice, pending approval. I couldn't help a thin, bitter smile. Months ago, I'd quietly set up dual authentication for any withdrawal over 10 grand. Brooke Carter had signed the papers without asking a single question. She thought she'd already won. The truth was, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. As I sat there under the dim kitchen light, the last 6 months replayed in my head like a slow, careful chess match. The signs had started small: business trips that didn't show up on her company calendar, dinner charges downtown when she was supposedly out of town, a missed call from Daniel at nearly midnight that she scrambled to explain away. Being a financial advisor trains you to spot patterns in chaos, and this one couldn't have been clearer. 3 months earlier, I had quietly moved $860,000, 00, our real nest egg, into a private trust under my name alone. The joint account she believed she controlled? Nothing but bait. Later that night, I sat in my study with a glass of bourbon in hand. The spreadsheets were gone, replaced by a folder holding signed trust documents. I stared at them for a long while, the strategist in me wide awake. Brooke Carter thought she'd blindsided me. But this wasn't just betrayal, it was an ambush. And I've never been the kind of man to walk into a fight unprepared. I can still remember the first time I met her, like it happened yesterday. 17 years ago, we were both at a financial conference in Chicago. We got into this long conversation about market volatility and investment strategies. I was the quiet, analytical type, the guy who built his life on logic, discipline, and spreadsheets. Brooke Carter was the opposite: bright, magnetic, full of charm. She could walk into a room and have everyone listening within minutes. Where I saw stability, she saw opportunity. Where I preferred a long-term plan, she thrived on risk. Somehow, we balanced each other. 2 years later, we were married, two ambitious people building a perfectly structured life together. We mapped out everything: career goals, investments, weekend hikes in the Rockies, dinner parties, and plans for kids by year 5. It was all neat, predictable, and safe. But life doesn't always follow the blueprint. By year 3, the conversations about children had grown tense. Doctor's appointments replaced late-night dreams, and eventually came the cold truth. Low sperm count, low odds. The words were sterile, but the impact wasn't. Brooke Carter cried the whole drive home, her face pressed against my shoulder. I promised her we'd find another way, treatments, adoption, whatever it took. But those plans faded. They just disappeared from our talks. Her sadness hardened into drive. She buried herself in work, taking more clients, more travel, more late nights. I did the same, telling myself that if I worked harder, made more money, everything would somehow fix itself. But cracks don't seal with cash. On our 10th anniversary, I tried to surprise her with a weekend in Aspen, a place we'd once dreamed of visiting. She hesitated before turning me down, saying she had an important sales retreat. I went alone. That night, when she called, I could hear laughter and music in the background, sounds that didn't belong to a work trip. After that, separate vacations became the norm. Our conversations shrank to house repairs, bills, and schedules. Physical closeness became more routine than real. And then came Daniel Mercer, her new regional director. From the moment he entered her professional orbit, everything about her changed. After Daniel came into the picture, Brooke Carter turned into a different person. She volunteered for everything: late-night conference calls, endless committees, special projects, anything that might catch his eye. "He values my input," she'd say, brushing me off whenever I tried to plan a dinner or a simple weekend getaway. "He thinks I'm being underused in my current role." Her ambition sharpened into something colder, more deliberate. At home, she was barely present anymore. Her phone started living face down on the counter, and she'd step outside to take calls she couldn't explain. Passwords appeared on her laptop, files she wouldn't let me near. But I'm a numbers guy. I see patterns for a living, and the patterns didn't lie. At first, I just noticed strange expenses. Dinners charged in cities she wasn't supposed to be in, travel receipts that didn't match her schedule. Then came late-night email alerts and small, unexplained withdrawals from our accounts. I started tracking everything. Quietly. Every suspicious charge, every date, every unexplained transaction. All of it went into a private spreadsheet. Each line became a piece of a puzzle I was determined to finish. The final proof came one morning when she left her email open on our shared laptop. There it was, a hotel reservation downtown, her name listed alongside Daniel Mercer. That was all I needed. But I didn't confront her. That's not my way. I closed the laptop, finished my coffee, and went to work like it was any other day. Outwardly, nothing changed. But inside, the shift had already happened. I started moving quietly, restructuring our finances, transferring most of our real assets into a private trust that only I controlled. The joint account, she thought held everything? That was bait. I stayed calm when she kissed my cheek before work. I listened without a word when she gushed about new opportunities and how Daniel believed in her potential. She thought she was steering the ship. She had no idea I'd already charted a different course. It was a gray Thursday morning when Lila, one of Brooke Carter's closest friends from Novogenics Pharma, showed up at my front door. Normally, she carried herself like a woman who had everything together. Polished, professional, the kind of person who never looked out of place. But not that day. Her confidence had cracked. I opened the door in my usual button-down shirt, keeping my expression neutral. "She asked me to come by," Lila said softly, clutching her leather purse like it was armor. "To get some of her things. She's not coming back, Ethan." Her eyes stayed down, fixed on the hardwood floors Brooke Carter had once insisted we install. I nodded and stepped aside. "The jewelry box is in the safe. She knows the combination." My voice was even, detached, the tone I used in meetings when emotions had no place. Lila lingered in the hallway, fidgeting with her purse strap. "She also wanted me to check if her transfer went through," she added hesitantly. I studied her face for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter and turned the screen toward her. "Pending approval," I said calmly. There was no anger in my tone, no satisfaction either, just a quiet steadiness that made her visibly uncomfortable. "She's going to be furious," Lila whispered, staring at the glowing words on the screen. "That's her choice," I replied, closing the laptop with deliberate care. Lila hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, but thought better of it. She picked up the suitcase and left without another word. I watched her go, my face unreadable, But inside I knew. The panic had already started. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Robert Keene, my lawyer and longtime friend, in his downtown office. He leafed through the folder I'd brought, his expression shifting from curiosity to grim approval. Inside were credit card statements showing dinners in the wrong cities, hotel confirmations tied to Brooke Carter's personal email, and records of withdrawals that far exceeded what we'd agreed on. Everything was documented, cross-referenced, and organized in order, each line item another calculated step in my growing strategy. When he finished reviewing, Robert closed the folder with a snap. "This is more than enough," he said. "Financial misconduct and marital abandonment. Colorado might be a no-fault state, but trust me, this will help with the settlement." I nodded, calm as ever. "File it as soon as possible." By that evening, the phone started buzzing. First, Brooke Carter's messages were measured, polite, asking for clarification. Then they turned sharp, filled with irritation. By the fourth day, the voicemails had an edge to them, threats hidden under fake calm. I didn't respond to a single one. Robert had advised me to let her stew, and I agreed. The more desperate she got, the more mistakes she'd make. For me, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about precision. The numbers told the story, and the story was clear. Brooke Carter was already slipping out of control. Friday evening, she came storming into the house without knocking. The sound of her heels hitting the floor echoed like gunfire through the quiet kitchen. I was pouring a glass of water when she appeared in the doorway, looking immaculate, but her eyes were wild. "What did you do?" she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. I set the glass down, meeting her gaze evenly. "You mean the transfer?" I asked. "The money's exactly where it should be." She shoved her phone toward me, the bank's message glowing on the screen. "Transfer denied. Dual authorization required," she read aloud, her voice rising. "Fix this, Ethan. Now." I didn't flinch. "Financial agreements are legally binding, Brooke Carter. You signed every document. You know how these accounts work." Her expression hardened. The calm, polished tone she used in sales meetings vanished, replaced with raw anger. "Half of that money is mine," she hissed. "I earned it." I tilted my head slightly, my voice dropping to something quiet, almost gentle. "Did Daniel tell you that?" I asked. The color drained from her face the second I said his name, but she recovered fast, slipping into that soft, practiced tone she used when closing a tough sale. "I was emotional, Ethan. I didn't mean for things to end this way. We should talk, figure this out properly." I shook my head. "There's nothing left to figure out. Robert Keene's handling the divorce. Your lawyer can reach out to him directly." That calmness must have cut deeper than shouting ever could, because that's when her mask finally cracked. Her voice turned cold, sharp with venom. "Daniel was right about you," she snapped. "You're pathetic. No ambition. No backbone." She snatched a framed photo off the mantel, one from Aspen, back when we still smiled like we meant it, and hurled it against the wall. The glass exploded, scattering across the floor like ice. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her house key, and tossed it onto the coffee table. "This isn't over," she hissed, before storming out. The door slammed behind her, leaving the house heavy with silence. The next afternoon, Robert called me. "We got a letter from Brooke Carter's attorney," he said, amusement in his voice. "They're demanding immediate release of marital assets and threatening to sue for financial abuse. Oh, and Daniel's name is copied on it." I didn't say a word, just waited for him to finish. "They think you're weak," he added with a quiet chuckle. "That's good. Let them. Being underestimated always works in our favor." I couldn't have agreed more. 2 days later, I met with Rachel Morgan, Lunara's HR director, in the back corner of a small cafe. She looked nervous, wearing a tailored suit and dark sunglasses, her posture tight, like she was afraid someone might be watching. She didn't order anything. Instead, she slid a small thumb drive across the table. "This conversation never happens," she said quietly. I kept my voice low. "What's on it?" Rachel glanced around before answering. "Emails between Daniel and Brooke Carter. 14 months worth. He's done this before. Used women to get access to confidential research, then sold it to competitors. The FBI's already investigating." I didn't let any emotion show, but inside, something clicked. The math had changed. This wasn't just infidelity or greed anymore. It was corporate espionage. And now, I had leverage neither of them could have imagined. When I met Robert the next day, he leaned back in his chair, studying the documents in front of him before sliding a final counterproposal across the desk. $50,000, he said calmly. One-time settlement, full forfeiture of marital assets, and a non-disclosure agreement covering everything. Her marriage, her work at Lunera, the whole story. She signs today, or we take it public. I sat quietly, tapping my finger against the arm of my chair. And if she refuses? Robert gave a faint, knowing smile. Then we show her lawyers just enough of the evidence to keep them awake at night. They'll realize the FBI will be far less forgiving. The meeting was set for the next morning. I arrived early, sitting at the far end of the conference table, calm and collected. Brooke Carter walked in with her attorney, David Nolan, a man who clearly thought his suit and charm could win any fight. That confidence started to fade fast once Robert handed him the folder. Nolan flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. "This is absurd," he said sharply. "My client is entitled to much more. You're offering practically nothing." Robert stayed perfectly composed. "My client is offering silence, Mr. Nolan, and that's worth far more than you realize. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to let this unfold in a federal courtroom." He opened another folder and laid out 3 printed emails on the table. Brooke Carter's eyes darted to them instantly, her hands tightening as she read. Each one had been chosen carefully. Daniel's promises of promotions, Brooke Carter's unauthorized access to Lunera's files, his repeated instructions to get what you can before you leave. It wasn't enough to fully implicate her, but it was enough to scare her senseless. Her voice trembled. "You don't understand. Daniel told me it wasn't serious, just internal research." Robert tilted his head slightly. "The FBI might see it differently, but that's not our concern, unless you'd like us to share what we know with them." Nolan leaned in, whispering urgently to her, his confident facade slipping away. Brooke Carter just shook her head, staring at the papers. I sat still, saying nothing. My silence rattled her more than any threat could. Nolan finally straightened, his tone softer now. "We'll need more time to consider this." Robert cut him off immediately. "No. The agreement is signed today, or we proceed and let the investigators handle it." Brooke Carter's shoulders slumped. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll sign." 2 hours later, it was done. She signed every page, relinquishing her claim to the trust, agreeing to full confidentiality, and walking away with just $50,000. No alimony, no contact. When she slid the papers back across the table, she finally looked at me. "Was any of this ever real to you?" she asked, her voice small, raw. "All of it was real to me," I said. "That's the difference between us." 3 days later, I sat alone in my home office. The thumb drive rested beside my laptop. I had kept my word. Brooke Carter would face no legal consequences as long as she honored the agreement. But Daniel wasn't covered by that silence. I opened a fresh anonymous email account, attached only the files that implicated him directly, and hit send to Lunera's CEO, their compliance department, and the board of directors. 4 days later, the Denver Post ran a small headline. "Pharmaceutical executive resigns amid internal investigation." Daniel Mercer was out, his career destroyed overnight. That evening, I got a single text from Brooke Carter. "I know it was you." I didn't reply. I just sat at my desk, looking out at the mountains through the window. The equation had balanced perfectly. Daniel had lost everything. Brooke Carter walked away with far less than she tried to steal. And me? I didn't have to raise my voice once. A week later, I signed the final divorce papers in Robert Keene's office. The pen moved steadily across each line, marking the end of a 17-year marriage. Robert closed the folder and gave a small nod. "It's done," he said. "You're free, Ethan." I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and let the words sink in. Free. There wasn't any rush of victory, no leftover anger, just a quiet calm. It felt like closing the final chapter of a long, painful story. Brooke Carter, now legally stripped of any claim to what I'd built, had already moved to Phoenix. Through a few of Robert's contacts, I heard she'd landed a job at a small pharmaceutical distributor, an entry-level sales role that came with a serious pay cut. The glamorous lifestyle she'd chased with Daniel Mercer was gone. Her social media, once full of fancy dinners and exotic getaways, had gone silent. I didn't feel satisfaction or revenge, just a quiet understanding that choices have consequences, and hers had finally caught up. A couple of weeks later, I walked through the glass doors of Meridian Capital, not as the betrayed husband this time, but as a consultant. Rachel Morgan had personally signed my contract, and I still kept her handwritten note in my jacket pocket. Justice shows up in unexpected ways, she'd written. After Daniel's fall, Lennara's executives were shaken. They wanted me to help rebuild their financial compliance department from the ground up. My background in ethical investments and fraud detection made me the right man for the job. Sitting at my new desk that first morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about creating something honest, something that mattered. My days were spent auditing accounts, tightening systems, and helping the leadership learn what real transparency looked like. It was steady work, quiet, detailed, and deliberate, the kind of thing I'd always been good at. But this time, it had meaning. For once, my career wasn't about growing numbers on a page. It was about protecting trust. Outside of work, life finally started to feel normal again, softer, slower. During a compliance review, I met Julia Bennett, a corporate attorney from Lennara's legal team. What started as professional chatter turned into longer talks, and before long, quiet dinners in tucked-away Denver restaurants. Julia Bennett was sharp, kind, and had a sense of calm that matched mine. She loved long hikes, meaningful conversations, and a good glass of wine at the end of the day. We weren't rushing into anything, just two people rebuilding from different pasts, one conversation at a time. For the first time in years, it felt like moving forward. At home, I made a decision that caught even Robert off guard. I took a small portion of the trust fund, the same one Brooke Carter had tried to drain, and turned it into scholarships for students studying financial ethics. When Robert asked why, I just said, turn what was meant to harm into something good. It wasn't about erasing the betrayal. It was about transforming it into something worthwhile. One evening, I stood on the back deck of my new home, bourbon in hand, watching the mountains soak in the last gold of sunset. The place was smaller than the old house, but it was mine. Every wall, every piece of furniture was chosen because it felt right, not because it impressed anyone. Julia Bennett was coming over for dinner, and for once, I wasn't anxious about the future. I was looking forward to it. As the cool air moved across the yard, I realized the real victory wasn't about watching Daniel fall or seeing Brooke Carter lose everything she'd gambled for. It was quieter, more personal. I'd earned back my self-respect. I'd taken the wreckage and built something better from it. I smiled, set my glass down, and thought, some equations aren't about money. They're about balance, integrity, and knowing when to walk away stronger than before. A few days later, on a quiet Saturday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table when my laptop chimed with a new email. It was from Lila, Brooke Carter's old friend, the same one who'd once shown up on my doorstep looking like she wanted to disappear. Her message was short and to the point. Ethan, I thought you should know. Brooke Carter and Daniel have split. He never followed through on his promises, and she's trying to rebuild. She asked about you, wanted to know if you were seeing anyone. I told her your life isn't her business. Take care, V. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. No anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of closure, like finally shutting a book I'd finished long ago. Brooke Carter had made her choices. I had made mine, and we'd both ended up exactly where those choices led. There was nothing left to say. At Meridian Capital, my reputation had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. The quiet finance guy who used to handle wealthy portfolios was now known for something else: ethics. Rebuilding Lennara's compliance division had changed the company's culture, and people noticed. At a leadership summit, Rachel introduced me as a man whose ethics are as precise as his numbers. Clients came looking for me, not just to grow their money, but to do it the right way. Articles in trade journals praised Lennara's turnaround, calling it a model of transparency and accountability. For the first time in my career, respect came not from the numbers I produced, but from the integrity behind them. But the biggest change wasn't professional, it was personal. Julia Bennett had become a steady, grounding part of my life. We spent weekends hiking mountain trails, talking about everything from work to family to the future. She didn't pry about my past, she simply understood it. And together, we started imagining what came next, slowly, honestly. That evening, I found myself on the deck again, watching the sunset burn orange across the Rockies. The mountains stood silent and unmoving, the same as they'd always been. A reminder that some things endure, no matter what life throws your way. I thought about something Brooke Carter once said during one of our last fights. He understands me. At the time, it had cut deep, like all those years together meant nothing. But standing there now, I smiled faintly. I didn't need anyone else to understand me anymore. I understood myself, and that was enough. Some equations, I realized, always balance out in the end, not in dollars or percentages, but in peace, purpose, and knowing you finally chose the right formula for your life.